experimenting with podcasting here. Recommendation: when you use a webcam, plug it into the computer. That helps a lot. So I'm working on these issues. Should President Donald Trump control the curriculum and the activities of colleges and universities, including the high-profile Ivy League universities that have been in the news and fighting back with huge research contracts and huge endowments? And we've had tremendous protests and riots at Columbia and other places in Boston and around the very liberal part of the country, where Palestinian protesters have completely taken over the central gathering places. What's called the quads in many places, but I don't want to use a too specific a word. But the various areas that are used for common grounds in universities. Now, should Donald Trump mandate that colleges and universities may not promote Palestinian rights, may not promote Islam, may not attack Israel? Yes. Why? Because he has to. It's the law. Now, this may come as a surprise. I was an attorney from middle of 1997 to the middle of 2022. Now retired. Some nicer locations here, and because I did that late in life, I had like a life before I went to law school, where people's brains are twisted and rotted by the legal system. So before I went to law school, I was a career civil servant in the U.S. Department of Education. Not a political appointee, although I could have been if an opening had come up first. But I spent 5 years there. Being a civil servant was very good, because while many of the mainstream people figured out that I was, not on their side, a lot of them didn't, and they were talked very freely. But anyway, I did some amazing things at the Department of Education. Like, I read the manual. They give you these manuals for, all the policy statements on different issues, and the organizational chart, and the laws governing the Department of Education, setting it up. And most people, there are people there who had been there when I started in late 80s, who had been there since Sputnik. And they knew the way that the people next to them did things, but they'd never read the manual. They'd never read the policy papers. So I was like a fast learner, because I didn't, just listen to the person next to me. I actually read the original documents. Now, the Department of Education, like most federal departments, tends very left-wing. But really, the most of those bureaucrats, they have different belief systems than you would think. The most important thing to the bureaucrats is coffee break, lunch, things that. But they line up with the left because bigger budgets and more power. But so that they tend to be left, but they're kind of a uniquely apolitical, kind of a self-serving bunch. And I like them, don't get me wrong. Nice people, fun conversations. But if I had my choice, they wouldn't be in charge of anything. So anyway, I actually read those things, and then I went to law school, and then I spent time in politics and issues, and I spent a lot of time around the Washington, D.C. conservative organizations, where we supported each other, Heritage Foundation, lectures and seminars, third generation lectures and seminars, library court at Paul Weirich's Free Congress, on and on and on. And so I had a chance to learn a lot outside of law school, but also as a lawyer. And by the time I went to law school, I was grounded in some measure of reality, not the fog of left-wing law, things like that. So, can you have a school that discriminates against Israel? Not should you. No, you can't do it. So you have a president who says, you know, I have an idea. I don't think we should bash Israelis or Jews. Doesn't matter. It's against the frickin' law. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Board of Education that we cannot discriminate against people in education, whether directly funded, whether direct government schools or universities, or it's been expanded to government-supported schools, colleges, and universities. So the use of federal funds, it prohibits it. It's okay. Brown versus Board of Education. We have to understand Supreme Court decisions are often deciding close questions of balanced rights, interpreting what a statute means, things like that. But there are some rare but very important Supreme Court decisions that are actually telling us this is what the Constitution requires. Now people wonder why we listen to them. Why don't we just read it for ourselves? Okay, that's a discussion for another day. It's a big one, but let's just set that aside for now. So, there are interpretations of the Constitution that are really kind of mysterious, where there's penumbras, which is a shadow. It's a kind of a shadow that comes when we have ironically, lunar eclipse, which is darkness. So that would be appropriate for a Supreme Court decision. A shadow of darkness, cone shaped from the eclipse of the moon, and all kinds of things like that. But there are times when it just says, no, this is what the Constitution says, flat out, not interpretation, not it's like, this is what it says. So Brown versus Board of Education is not just a Supreme Court decision. It's the flippin' Constitution, like Brady versus Maryland, which police officers and investigators, prosecutors routinely violate. If we put people in jail for violating Brady versus Maryland from the Constitution, there would be no prosecutors outside of jail. Anyway, so because they're that arrogant and criminal. But anyway, so the thing is the Brown versus Board of Education, which says you cannot discriminate in a government institution, education institution, or using government funds, is from the Constitution itself. It's not an opinion. It's not like, well, maybe they'll change their mind. It's like, no, that's what the Constitution requires. So can you have an Ivy League institution, even if it's private, that uses federal funds or is based on federal funds, or it's government oriented, or it's highly dependent by research grants on the federal government or state government? No, you can't do it. Well, I wanna. No, you can't do it. Well, I have differences of opinion. No, you can't do it. It's unconstitutional. It's not just illegal, it's unconstitutional. You can't do it. Now, if I start, I just don't want to do Johns all the time. It just seems boring. But if I start, they're all just arbitrary. So who knows? If I start Luigi's high school, and it's completely private, no government funds, it's not government or anything like that. And okay, let me go back. I forgot. Let me use myself. John Mosley. I start John Mosley Academy. And because I'm a quarter Swedish, and there was a time, and right now they don't care, but there was a time in history where the Swedes and the Norwegians were at the least dissing each other, if not fighting with each other. So I discriminate against Norwegians because I'm a quarter Swedish, and there's an old saying, oh, how does it go? I don't remember. It's like trashing on the it's the Swedes. No, actually that one is the Norwegians trashing on the Swedes. So I don't allow Norwegians or anyone of Norwegian descent to enroll in my school, private school. Can I do that? Hell no. It's illegal. I will lose my tax status. I will be prosecuted for civil rights violation. Well, prosecuted maybe in a civil sense, which is actually correct use of the term, but not quite the same. And I will be used. It will be pursued, and it'll be a violation if I use any government funds at all. Be a violation of Brown versus Board of Education. So if a president, who is the only law enforcement officer listed in the Constitution, could everybody turn in their Constitution to the page where it talks about the Attorney General? No, you can't, because it's not there. There's no Attorney General mentioned in the Constitution. Can you turn to the page where it talks about the Department of Justice? No, there's no Department of Justice in the Constitution. How about U.S. attorneys? No, there's no U.S. attorneys mentioned in the Constitution. It's implied that the president, in part of his many roles, like other people, is not going to be able to work unless he hires subordinates. So the concept of subordinates to do the president's work, of course, that's well understood from hundreds of years of English rule and thousands of years of humanity. That when it says that when a law says that the Attorney General can do this or that, obviously he could hire people to do it, to help him, to do it for him. But technically, the authority is the president. Who is the law enforcement officer or officers of the United States? The president. One. That's it. Donald Trump. Under the Constitution, it's Trump. In a few years, it will be J.D. Vance. But the thing is, there is no one in the Constitution, there's no one mentioned in the Constitution other than the chief executive officer of the executive branch, who is obligated to see that the laws be faithfully executed. So if a president, as has actually happened for decades and decades and decades, has seen that the law is being violated with regards to equal access to education. We bash on Jews, we bash on Israel, and I'm sure if I were sensitive to other issues, there's lots of other examples, because Washington, D.C. is corrupt. They don't follow the law. They follow the lobbyist checks and the favorite people and things like that. So if a president were aware of that, and he says, no, I'm not going to do anything, that's a violation of his constitutional duties. It's an impeachable offense, really. Maybe. It's close. To say, I know that the law is not being followed because we're discriminating against Jews. We're discriminating against Israel. Would be a violation of his duties under the Constitution. It's not a question of if he likes it or not, or, well, my administration will stand up for the rights of everybody in college. No, you have to do that. It's your job. You have no choice. And so that's where we're at, is that for months and months and months, really for a year, and this has been boiling for a while, because the left is insane and the left is evil. And so they've been building this, and they say, well, we're evil. I wonder who our allies are. Who else is evil? And they look around society and they look around the world and say, here's somebody who's evil. Let's make common cause with them. So they've been boiling the water when it comes to Palestine. And it's a whole nother subject, but of course the Palestine is a name for Israel given by the occupying Roman Empire, the Roman Empire's occupying forces. So when you hear Palestine, that's Israel. It's interesting. There's a whole bunch of newspaper headlines that say Arabs invade Palestine. I wish I had figured out how to use this software. I'd show it on the screen. I'll figure that out eventually. So anyway, that's a whole nother topic. But when we've had all these protests where pretty much illiterate morons who don't know, if you showed them a map with no country names, if you like white out all the names, you say, okay, show me Palestine. They wouldn't be able to find it. If they show, well, who are the Palestinians? They don't know. They don't know anything. They just, they just know a party when they see it, and people want to, cut class and camp out on the commons of the university and kick people around and yell at people, and they know a party when they see it, and that's that's what it is. But these people then, of course, took over university buildings. They harassed people. They pretended to be their own government, so they would demand to see identification to decide if you could come into their area, which they had occupied, of the university, and basically in many forms made Jews afraid to go to class, to gain their education. If you interfere with some racial groups or ethnic groups or religious groups' access to education, you broke the law. Not Trump's law, the Trump passed by Congress. The Trump is found by the U.S. Supreme Court under the most liberal left-wing justices. The Burger Court, some of the far left versions of our Supreme Court. So the president is obligated, if it comes to his attention, to investigate whether the tax laws are being violated, whether the Constitution is being violated, whether the civil rights laws are being violated. And for example, if I opened John Mosley's Academy and Norwegians were not allowed, at the very least, the IRS would take away my tax status. I could not be nonprofit. I could not be an educational institution. I would be, you don't believe me? Look up Form 1023 of the IRS website where you apply for nonprofit status. There's lots of different, actually 1020, there's a number of different categories. But it asks you in there, do you have a policy against discrimination? And if necessary, they'll demand to see it. Where is your official policy prohibiting discrimination against any ethnic group, religious group, national origin, race, color, you name it? And if the educational institution is not prohibiting discrimination, you lose your tax status as an educational institution. That means Harvard, Columbia would be taxed as a nonprofit company. I think they'd probably be losing money without the government, assistance. But one way or another, they'd probably pay some very heavy taxes. They'd lose money on their endowment. Allegedly $50 billion. Some people say, oh no, it's not quite that much, whatever. So if you get down to the interest, the investment on $50 billion, and you say, no, you're not tax exempt anymore, you're discriminating against Jews. You're frightening Jews. You're intimidating them from getting an education. Then you say, okay, all of your endowment, taxable. Interest, investment, you name it, all taxable. Now, of course, I'm using the example of the extreme violence against Israel, against Jews, does it work the other way? Well, of course it does. You know, if something were happening that were intimidating Muslims, other than the fact that they're drama queens and pretending to be intimidated when they're not, it's like a Muslim shoots somebody and they're like, and then it's in the news like, oh no, I'm afraid. No, you're not. You're lying. Grow up. But if there were actually something comparable against Muslims, yes, it goes both ways. It goes all ways. Of course it's the same standard. Better damn well be the same standard. But the problem is that we have ignored that for decades now. It's like I probably shouldn't. Should I reveal this? When I went to the university, there were all these protests against apartheid. Divest from South Africa. Pressuring companies in the United States to sell their stock or their businesses in South Africa because of apartheid. Now, South Africa has problems these days, but thank God we ended apartheid. I mean, it's a better world, it's a better Africa, although not perfect. Nothing ever is. It's the way of the world. So, but the thing is so I came with a sign saying divest from East Europe. I'm agreeing with them. I didn't say don't invest from South Africa. I'm saying, you're right. And we should apply this principle to other countries as well. Oh, God, I practically got murdered. I mean, when I went to the side of the protest with my divest from Eastern Europe, I'm lucky. I mean, there is no place more dangerous than at a left-wing peace rally. If it's a peace rally by the left, you're likely to get killed. I got yelled at there. The other part, I got misquoted in the paper. That's why I'm hesitating, because someone will go pull out the misquote. They took the beginning of my paragraph and the end of my paragraph, and they cut out the middle. And so I'm not gonna put blood in the water on that. Let somebody figure it out. But it's not what I said. Anyway, so I guess that's about it. Because when Donald Trump is trying to control Ivy League universities, he's following the law. Democrats, talking to you. It's your law. You passed it. It's your Supreme Court when the Supreme Court was leftist, it's your Supreme Court precedents. It's your policy. You put it on paper. You don't like it? Well, too bad. So if they're persecuting Jews, your law doesn't allow that. So, oh well. So we have to follow the law as written. Research contracts. Yep. They have, Harvard and Columbia and Princeton, they have all these research contracts with the federal government. Nope. The law says if you're discriminating, if your educational institution is discriminating, you're cut off. That's the law. It's been that way for decades. I used to work in the audit division of the Management Improvement Service, and they would go out and they would audit grantees and contractors, and that's one of the things they check for is there an anti-discrimination policy in force. And if they didn't have an anti-discrimination, even if it's a grant, a contract, research contract, or something like that, if there's not an anti-discrimination policy, or if there's any evidence that it was violated, you're cut off. That's the law. That's not Trump. It's the law. So the thing is, what Trump is doing is, number one, doing an absolutely awful job of explaining himself, hiring people that don't know public relations. Well, no Republican knows public conservatives, Republicans are incompetent when it comes to public relations, and but Trump is just following the law. If you discriminate, you're off you're cut off. And if the situation were reversed, there wouldn't be any negotiation. There wouldn't be a negotiation. Can we work this out? Mm-mm. You're done. You're gone. You're out of business. So anyway, that's the complication of whether President Trump is a tyrant and a dictator who's trying to control these poor, wealthy, elite, privileged left-wing universities. No, he's not. Talk later. Jonathan Mosley, I hate when people don't say at the end who it is. Jonathan Mosley, a Virginia attorney, now retired in warmer climates.